Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending our event today. What care options best fit your family? We have Sally here with us, who's going to be talking about helping her mom move into Porter Hills Village. Dave, who's actually one of our sales counselors here, and he's going to talk about his experience with his dad. And then we also have Amy, who's our director of sales at Porter Hills, and she's going to discuss her parents' move into a continuum of care as well. Just a reminder for everyone on how Zoom works. Matt, if you could go to the next slide. So Zoom, everyone is muted and we don't see your video, so you can only see us. We are recording this for later viewing for everyone. And you do have an option to answer questions or ask questions, however, by clicking on the Q&A at the bottom and submitting your questions that way. So please feel free to submit a question at any time, and then we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. Okay, and so starting off, I want to just have Amy go ahead and talk a little bit more about her experience, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so we're glad to have all of you with us today. I think the three of us all went through different types of journeys. So for my parents, they made the decision on their own to move into independent living at really a young age, early 70s. They moved into not Porter Hills, a different community, but a full continuing care retirement community. And my brothers and I were not really a part of the decision. Our parents made that decision on their own and just informed us that that's what they were doing. We thought that was a great idea, and they made the move at a time when they were both healthy and able to, basically handle the move on their own.
Wonderful, thank you. And Dave, can you talk a little bit about your experience with your dad?
Be glad to, thank you. So my parents moved back to Grand Rapids about 30 years ago. They had built a home to age in place, and that served them very well for a long period of time. And about 2.5 years ago, my mother was experiencing a decline. And so they brought some assistance into their home, and eventually mom passed on under hospice care, and then dad remained in the home by himself.
Okay.
And as things became more difficult, he was asking for more and more help, and then was experiencing some further decline, and became apparent that there was a time for change coming on the horizon. What do we do next?
Okay. And Sally, can you talk a little bit about your mom moving in here to Porter Hills and how that came about?
Sure. Just a bit of background. My parents, my mom and dad, moved into a 55 plus apartment living in a small community outside of Grand Rapids. And my dad passed away in 2005, and my mom continued to live there. A couple of years ago, my sisters and I decided mom was probably going to need more care. She was approaching 90. And so we began looking for another place for her where she could get continued social aspects of living alone, much more than she was getting in her own apartment. So we began looking a couple of years ago, and we found Porter Hills and talked to Joy, and it sounded like a good place for her to be.
Okay, great. So Sally, it sounds like for you guys, really it was your sisters and you that were pushing the decision for your mom, correct?
Absolutely. My mom was showing some signs of memory loss, but she wasn't recognizing those. And in taking her to her doctor's appointments and so on, we determined that she was starting to go into that kind of a memory issue in her later ages. Well, she was almost 90 at that point. So she did not want to move at all. She was very happy, thank you very much. And she was still driving as well, which was a big concern for us. So my sisters and I, we really worked together to get her to move. And even though she was very resistant up until the day she moved, she said to us, she goes, well, I guess if that's what you think I should do, I will do that. But she wasn't real happy about it.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed meeting with all of you guys, and I think it was a successful move for her, I hope. So
Oh, absolutely. When she got in, she was in independent living, which was, you have another name for it, which is called.
yeah, that's our enhanced independent living that she moved into.
Right. So I'd say, you know, a week or two, she became more acclimated to it. She met her neighbors. She would go up to the dining room for meals and began to really like it there. So the more and more she's been there. I think we took her in or she moved there in September of 2019. I don't want to skip over, you know, all the things that have gone on, because we'll probably get to some questions later about that. But she absolutely loves her place, and she attributes her particular room right now to you, Joy. She calls you, your friend was so nice. She gave me this great room. And I'm like, oh, I know her. Yes, she's my friend.
That's awesome. So Dave, with your family, it sounds like your dad was very involved in the decision of what he thought was best for him, right?
He was very involved. He had gotten to the point where, while we still had assistants coming in for him, they were doing some housekeeping and his laundry and doing some shopping for him and providing meals. We were still supplementing that on the weekends and heading over to his house a couple times a week. And, oh, while you're here, could you do this? And it just became more and more involved, and it just became harder and harder for him to manage things on his own. He was still driving and kind of was using that as the gauge of when it's time to move. And he continued to drive, so that benchmark was a moving indicator. But just even the plan of the drain of doing meal planning and pulling those things together just became more and more taxing. And his mom, my grandmother, 50 years ago, was a resident here at Porter Hills. And so they had always planned that when the time came, Porter Hills was where they were going to move to. And so it became apparent that Dad was really in some severe health declines and was really getting more and more difficulty breathing. Even, getting out of a chair was just draining his oxygen. And it was just a steep decline. And so then we had to kind of scramble a little bit and find out what's next for him. And my wife is a nurse. So she first proposed the idea of moving Dad in with us. I was like, what? And she said, no, I think we could really pull this off, and it would be great. And Dad was very reluctant, and it took some deep conversations and some considerations. My sister lives in town. What does that mean for her? And he was pretty insistent that he would not do that to us. And it came to a point where we were able to convince him that you're not doing it to us, you're doing it with us. And so it took some work, but we got there.
Yeah. And Amy, you mentioned that your parents really made the decision without you, but that wasn't the case as they continued living there, correct?
Right. So I think my mother had always planned to move into this particular community, and I don't know if my dad took her seriously or not, but one winter she was out shoveling snow and chopping ice on their driveway, and she fell and she broke her arm, and she came in the house and said, that's it, we're moving. My dad did not want to move. I think he very much felt like, what on earth am I going to do all day long in a retirement community? As it turned out, I mean, he thrived and actually got way more involved in all kinds of things than my mother actually did. But the interesting thing, and this is where hopefully our audience has seen that these are three very different paths that that our parents took. At the time that my parents moved in, I mean, as I said, it was their decision. In hindsight now, it turned out to be a very fortuitous decision because they were healthy and fine when they moved in their early 70s. But it wasn't long after they moved in that my dad found out that he had cancer. And a little, not even that long after that, we as a family started noticing some changes in our mother and in her memory. So we were very thankful as these things unfolded that our parents were in a continuing care community, because we knew that as things progressed for both of them, my mom and my dad, that our parents were right in the best place where they could be and did not have to face a decision to move when there were health challenges.
Yeah. And so you got involved quite a bit more as your mom continued, correct?
Well, so what happened is my dad, of course, the cancer progressed and he got sicker and less able to do things. They were in an independent living apartment. And at the same time, my mother's dementia was progressing to the point where when my dad was finally on hospice, my mother was really a barrier to bringing in the care that my dad needed. And again, because they were in this community, there was available help within the community. And I would call the staff. I was living out of state at that point, and I would call the staff and I would line up their home care to come in and help my dad. And then my mother, now with the advancing of the dementia, would not let the caregivers in the door. So, it was a very frustrating, difficult time. I guess what my brothers and I have said about that period was, as a family, we were going through the crisis of our father was dying and our mother's dementia was getting worse. That was a family crisis, but we were so thankful that in the midst of that, we did not also have to be running around trying to figure out where either of them was going to go. So we knew as time passed with our dad being on hospice that as soon as he passed away, our mother would not be able to stay in that independent living apartment. But I did not have to run all over town and look at, assisted living places because they were in a continuing care community. So we knew that if mother needed to move out of that independent apartment, she could just go right into assisted living and get the next level of care. That part was taken care of for us. And we were just so thankful, that our parents had made the decision before any of this happened. And we're in a place where the family, we didn't have to be in crisis with regard to where they were going to go next if they needed more care, which they ended up obviously needing more care.
Mm-hmm. Now, Sally, with your mom, she did switch apartments while she's been here with us, but you and your sisters have always been really involved with that as well.
Sure. We took mom out during COVID, and she was living with my sister and me for a couple months. And during that time, we noticed that she needed more care than she probably was getting in enhanced living at Prairie Hills Village. So we talked to you and we said, we really think mom needs to go into catered living, which is assisted living. And could you make that switch while she's out? And so together we worked on getting her a new place, and you picked it out. We didn't see it at all. We just said, okay, what does it look like? You said it looks like her other place. She's just on a different floor and she's looking out into a beautiful courtyard. Well, that move was actually advantageous for us and for her, because even though she couldn't, well, she didn't even remember, honestly, what room she lived in when she was out. And then when she came back there, she felt like, okay, this is a bigger room for me. This is a great setting. It was exactly the same. It was just a different layout. But the idea that she was looking out onto this beautiful courtyard and she had a little patio, she had new appreciation for where she was living. And this spring, I'm seriously so happy about this. She just yesterday, I went over there and she talks about all the animals that are outside that she gets to watch. She watches the squirrels, she feeds the squirrels, and she also has this mama and baby ducks that are around her courtyard and walk through every single day. In fact, she fed that duck before she had her baby. So just little things like that have been really wonderful for her, especially during COVID. You know, we haven't been able to do a lot of things up until this point. Now we are able to get back in there and see her place and bring her out more often for family get-togethers, as well as for doctor's appointments and all that. One of the other things I wanted to say is that one thing that we were worried about when we first put mom, or took mom over and, you know, moved her to enhanced living, and we were wondering, well, how are we going to be able to maneuver through that? Are we going to be able to come and go? And we were really pleased with how that all worked out initially before COVID, because we could come in whenever we needed to. I had a key, my sisters had a key, and we would come and visit mom all the time. That changed during COVID for necessary reasons, but now things are, you know, opening up again. So that's really good.
Dave, how has it gone for you now that you've had your dad with you for a little while? How has that been for your family?
It has been fantastic and difficult at the same time. There's that tension that goes on with family dynamics, with certain expectations. My father is very laid back and very contented person. So we hold that tension of how to live your best life, and put forth a little bit of effort to make that best life better, or allow someone to be content and just sit back and take things as they come. And we were constantly encouraging him to drink more water. He's, well, I drink a couple of cups of coffee and that's basically water. And so we just kind of encourage that. And he realizes that, you know, I feel better and sleep better when I'm more active. That's great, Dad. You should really do that. You know, maybe we could do some exercise. Yeah. And that's about as far as it goes. So we kind of work through that balance of being an encouragement and a nag. And you never know which day, which is quite which. There are also some different dynamics within family and who's going to do what. My wife Paige is working from home these days, so a lot of this falls on her. If he has a doctor's appointment, who's going to take the time to go? If he has different appointments, you know, how do we coordinate that? We were able to set up what we call a time tree schedule, where he's got his posted schedule, and each of us can add things to his calendar and assign tasks to who's going to do that. So that helps organizationally, and that's been a lot of fun. And then there are just some awkward conversations that happen. For instance, Dad was used to paying for the care that he got. And so it's like, well, you wouldn't pay us, you know, we're a family and we do things for each other. He says, well, I can pay my own way around here. I'm used to doing that. And so it's just talking about some of those things that are just weird. Another type of thing that would be, you know, difficult would be, you know, what type of personal care does he need? And how do we go about that? And it's just working through it and having conversations that we're not used to having, and just being comfortable with those over time.
Well, and I mean, you work in the industry, so you talk to people about this all the time.
I do.
So is the experience what you anticipated?
Yes, for as far as the mechanics of it all, but then those dynamics that happen personally are just unusual. We got Dad's living quarters set up as much as we could for him to be at home. The bathroom, all of our bedrooms are upstairs, and Dad can't do stairs. So we put in a stair lift to accommodate that for him. He couldn't get in and out of a bathtub, so the only shower was in our bedroom. And so we switched things around and made another bedroom kind of his den, and just kind of set that up a little bit. So it was much closer than what he was used to as far as space goes. So it means he had fewer steps. So he got less walking in just because everything was in close proximity. But it's gone really well. We had a couple surprises. One would be Dad is 93, and he's used to keeping his quarters much warmer than what we keep our house at. So we had a space heater that would be in his den, and there's a refrigerator in the den, and there's, I think there's a power strip on just about every outlet in the room. And all of a sudden we got our heating bill in the cold of winter, and it was $120 higher than normal. So then what do we do with that? So it's just unusual circumstances that still do surprise us.
You'll save a little on your air conditioning this year, though. So
there you go. There you go.
So Amy, same question for you. You're familiar with continuums, obviously. So is there anything that you didn't anticipate with your parents' experience, or did you have a pretty good understanding of what was coming?
Well, I think first of all, it's just absolutely harder than you think when it's your own parents, whether you work in the industry or not. Even if you have friends or other family that are going through things with your parents and you listen to what they're saying, it's very different when it's your own parents and you're coming to terms with the fact that they are aging and not able to do things, or as many things as they were before. So that surprised me, I guess, having worked in this industry for many years. My reactions when it involved my own parents, I very much was in daughter mode. And we joke around here sometimes about, when, daughters can get riled up about what's going on with their parents. And I was most definitely that daughter at this community, looking out for my mom. So my dad did, of course, pass away. It's been 5 years now, and I was living out of state, and just like we knew, it was a crisis. Our mother could not stay in that independent living apartment. So 2 months after my dad died, I flew back, and we needed to get her into assisted living with a dementia diagnosis, basically. So not unlike what Sally and her sisters went through. This was no longer my mom's decision. We made the decision, and we had to move her. And it's a really difficult thing for adult children to have to go through when the parent either is not able to make their own decision or is unwilling to make it. It's really hard. It's very, very emotional. This is still our parent. We're still the child. I mean, there were so many times when I just felt like I was 12 years old all over again, because my mother was very angry at what we were trying to do. So we got her moved into assisted living and, set up her space and tried to make it very similar to where she had come from. But with the confusion, I mean, that's really hard. I will say that she lived in assisted living then for 2 years before it became apparent and the staff really came to us as a family and said, your mother really needs memory care. And that was a whole, again, I work in this environment. I have these kinds of conversations with other family members, but when they talk to me about my mom, I just started bawling. I just said, no, we can't, we're not putting her in memory care. She doesn't belong there, it's very difficult. And I have learned so much. So now, Dave, you were afraid you were going to get emotional, and now here I am. So my mother passed away a year ago, so this is still fresh, but I did not want my mother to move to memory care. And in hindsight, after we did make that move, I saw how much better it was for her to be in the appropriate level of care that she needed. And what I've come to realize is that when I, as a daughter, looked around in that memory care area, and I looked at the other residents, and I looked at the tiny room that she was going to be in, I was looking through my eyes as a daughter saying, well, she doesn't look like them, and that room is not big enough, and we can't do this. What I've realized in hindsight is that my mother didn't have any of those thoughts. To my mother, it was just, okay, now this is the new place where I sleep. And so it did end up to be exactly the right place for her at the right time. She did actually much better in memory care than she did in assisted living because she was getting the help that she needed. She was getting the more attention from the staff in the way that she needed it. Whereas in assisted living, that's just not set up for that. So I have just a newfound respect for the kind of programs that go on in memory care communities, because it is different than the kind of programming that's set up in assisted living. And it's I would say most all cases, it's exactly the right kind of programming that a person with dementia needs.
Yeah. Sally, I don't know if you had any experience with senior living before you started researching for your mom. Did you and your sisters ever have family members or anyone else involved?
Yes, my grandma, well, this is the interesting part of it. My grandmother lived to be 103, but she lived in the same 55 plus apartment setting that my mom and dad did. But she never required anything. She lived on her own. She was good till the day she died. Basically, she died of a heart attack at the hospital, just from heart failure. But her mind was just perfect. She was very mobile. She was very social. And so for my mother, she always had her mother to base her understanding of how her life would go. So I think because my grandma was so vital and she died at a very late age, and my mom felt like, well, I'm not even 90 yet. Why should I have to go into a place where grandma didn't have to go? And she had a very different circumstance. I mean, mom's memory was becoming more and more problematic, and she wasn't facing up to it or even realizing it. What she didn't remember, she didn't remember.
Right.
We could see it, of course. So basically, we went through a couple of situations where, well, we came in to Porter Hills. She liked everything she saw. We had a little lunch with Joy, and she was able to see the whole facilities. She says, okay, and she signed the paperwork and all that. Well, I think it was a week or a week and a half before she was going to move. I took her out for dinner, and she says, well, I just wanted to let you know I've changed my mind. I'm not moving. And I said, I couldn't speak. I mean, I was so upset that I could not speak. I was like, I couldn't deal with it. I had to leave the restaurant at one point just to get myself together. Came back and took her home, and I talked to my sister after. She goes, oh, yes, she is. She's going to be moving. She spent the most time with my mom, and she says, oh yeah, she's gonna move. You can betcha. So I guess what my takeaway about this is that if I hadn't had my siblings right on board with me, I don't know if I could have done it as well as, having the whole family agree that this is the best place for her. And in hindsight, she loves where she lives. And, that's the most difficult part of it. They're going into a new situation at a very late stage in their life. And it can be scary, I'm sure. It's like, well, I don't know what this place is like. I really like my friends over here. And she's adjusted very well, and she still sees her friends. She still plays bridge. She goes back to our little community. We take her there. She plays bridge with her friends, but she does have these short-term memory issues that require her to have this ongoing care that she has at Porter Hills Village right now. So that's the good part about it.
I'm surprised at how often I hear, we wish we would have done this sooner, because a lot of our seniors have that stigma in their head about like, oh, this place that either my parents never had to go to themselves, or, it's a horrible place. We don't ever want to go there. So we do a lot of counseling with families to try to help them understand what it is. So I'm so happy it's worked out really well for your mom so far.
Well, one thing too, I guess I'll chime in here about this, is that back in the day when my mom, they talked about nursing homes, and it was different. It was different 30, 40, 50 years ago. In a lot of instances, she saw her aunts go into certain places, and she didn't want to do that. But, this is a whole different thing. This is a community. It's not a negative thing. So, but that's all she had to base her decision on, is that you're putting me into this place. And we're like, no, Mom, this is a community. There are people there, there are nice people there. There are neighbors that you can interact with. So she's been very pleased with that part of it.
Yeah, we cringe when we hear the word facility, for sure. Community is a much better word for what we try to achieve here. So are there any pros or cons to the move that you want to share, Sally? Things that that was perfect for what you guys wanted, or anything that didn't go as planned?
Well, I feel like everything went better than we thought initially. The only thing I could say is that during COVID, this has been difficult for everybody. And the good thing about it, we knew that Mom was safe there. It was frustrating for us not to be able to see her or to see her apartment before we moved her into the new catered living area. And so she would call us on the phone and couldn't find something, and we were not unable to help her with those kinds of things. But we tried to coach her through getting some help, from the staff in catered living. And so, we worked a lot with this. We've worked a lot with the staff up to this point. So, but things are vastly better now that we can get in there and see her and all that. And she was always safe. We knew that, and we could also take her out for medical appointments and so on and so forth. So it wasn't like we never saw her, but it was just the fact that the ability to see her room was not available to us. But I would say that overall, I wouldn't change our decision. I'm happy with the decision. My sisters are happy with the decision. And my mom is delighted. She loves her room. She goes, this is the coolest room. I love it. Tell your friend I really like it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Dave, are there pros and cons to having your dad be home with you?
Yeah, there's both. Where we've always had a pretty close relationship, so that continues to develop and cherish. But it is all the time. Dad is pretty quick to go back upstairs to his room. But even then, he's got a bell that he can ring if he needs something. But even when he's upstairs, often he'll be the topic of conversation. You know, how do we engage him? How do we care for him? How do we get him involved in things? And how do we draw in the rest of the family to participate? So it can be pretty consuming if you let yourself focus only on that. But it has been great. We had just gotten to the point where Dad has had both of his vaccines and is a little bit freer to move about the community, if you will. So we've been able to get him back to church on Sunday morning, and that's been a big help. And to engage in some of the things that he normally does day to day, and that takes an encouragement or a nag, depending on one's point of view. And so he has gone reluctantly to some things that he has appreciated going. You know, it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of energy. He's wearing a mask when he's got to go. He's got hearing aids and all those challenges that come together when it's hard to hear in a group what people are saying, and you feel like you miss out on a lot. But yet at the same time, put the work into it, and you feel far more engaged and more connected. So that's been a real blessing. So yeah, those are some of those challenges and wins at the same time.
Amy, are there pros and cons to your parents' journey with their continuum?
Well, certainly the best thing was that they made the decision to move into this community when they were able to make the decision and do the move and were healthy at that time. So that's huge. And of course, in our roles at Porter Hills, that's what we always encourage people to do, right? Make this move when you can make it and when you can make the decision to do it. One of the things, the hardest move that happened, so my mother had 3 moves. The first move into the community with my dad, then her move into assisted living, and then her move into memory care. So the hardest of all of those was the move from her independent living apartment into assisted living, because she was in the stage of the disease, the dementia disease, that I always referred to as kind of the most hellacious stage, because they have 1 foot in reality and 1 foot in the dementia haze. And to me, that's the worst place to be. So she was aware enough to know that she was, moving to assisted living. So that was very bad. And it was very hard for me because she was blaming me for that move, and she was very angry. When we had to make the move to memory care, it was a really much more coordinated effort that ended up, it was a lot of work to pull it off, but it really made it much easier. So I engaged, of course, the help of my brothers and their spouses. I also engaged the help of a couple that lived in the community that were very good friends of both of my parents. And so what we did was, the friends in the community and I took my mother to lunch in the dining room. So I had the easy part because I'm keeping my mother, engaged and entertained at lunch, and my brothers and their spouses were very hurriedly moving everything from her assisted living room into her memory care room, which was on the opposite side of the building. But they were, not quite the same size. The memory care room was smaller, but they moved everything while we were at lunch and set up the bed and the pictures exactly the way it was in my mother's assisted living apartment. So my mother was finished with lunch and she was like, come on, let's go. I want to go, and I'm stalling and then texting my brother saying, okay, we're on our way. And instead of walking her back to assisted living, I walked her to the memory care area. And she did say at one point, why are we going this way? She didn't, and I said, oh, we're just taking a different route. I had to get okay with what we in the industry call therapeutic fibbing. So I was lying. That's the bottom line. I was telling my mother lies. But we walked into memory care and we went into the room and there's my brothers and she's, oh, I didn't know you were coming to visit me. And there's her bed that looked exactly like, and she just flopped down on her bed and it was, you know, it was much easier move, but it was because the disease had progressed. But all of that coordination, I think, you know, made that a much better experience for us as a family and for her than when we moved her into assisted living.
I've heard you talk about that story a few times, and I don't think it was as easy for you as it was for them. I mean, it was hard for you to walk her down there.
It was, but you know, what was even harder, and I don't know if anyone in our audience is dealing with this, this just, you know, I guess goes back to when we talk to people who are still very independent and, you know, is, you know, get your things in order ahead of time, because the most difficult thing that I had to do as an adult child was right after my dad died. We needed to make decisions on behalf of the finances and all kinds of stuff in my parents' estate, which, you know, was not a large estate by any means, but we needed to be able to make the decisions. So I had to take my mother to her doctor's office and have her declared incompetent. And that was the absolute worst thing. I felt like I was leading the lamb to the slaughter. You guys have heard me say that before. You know, but it was because my dad had never put that in place. Even though he knew that my mother had memory issues, she was still in control of everything when he died. So, you know, in hindsight, that should not, those things should have been taken care of at this, when he realized that she had dementia, but they weren't. So, you know, it's just, I see Sally shaking her head because, you know, as adult children, then those things fall on us to have to take care of. And those are hard things. That's stuff they don't teach you.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the most successful moves we have here, or even meetings sometimes, whether they choose to move in or not, is just when the family's all doing it together or on the same page together, so they can talk through the options and know what it looks like. So that's been a big thing for me. When I meet with families and they're there together and they're talking through it and they're really looking at it, at the end of the day, they make whatever decision's best, and that's, you always feel a lot better about it. So, so I guess I'd like to ask all of you what advice you would have for other families that might be going through the same thing. So Amy, if you want to start on that question.
Well, my advice to anybody that's on this webinar that is not an adult child, but is, you know, considering this type of living, is to do it sooner than you think you have to. You know, Dave said that for his dad, the big thing was, well, when I can no longer drive, then that's my sign that I need to move. And we hear that all the time. And that's, you know, probably not the best thing to say is your line in the sand. I would encourage people to really look at this earlier, when you are able to make your own decisions, and not leave it to your kids to have to make those decisions for you.
Right. Sally, what would be your advice to other families?
Definitely coming together as a family, as siblings, to be on the same page. We had a lot of discussion before we did this, and we also had some good advice from my sister's husband. He suggested we go to, you know, an attorney and get her paperwork in order, because she had old paperwork from 10 to 15 to 20 years ago. And so we put a whole new, you know, her estate was very minimal, but yet part of that was who's the power of attorney when you can't make decisions, who's the medical power of attorney, all these things, and interestingly enough, once we had that done, it was very soon after that that we began to look for the right place for my mom, and we got some advice from somebody who specializes in, being like a consultant for people to let them know, okay, this is what you guys can think about, as far as where you want to go. These are the kind of places. Went to a person like that. So we got all that understood, and then we began to look, and I was probably the one, my sister and her husband were looking at some other places for mom, and I was just shaking my head going, no, she needs a continuum of care. I want her to go, I said, I'm going to go to Porter Hills. And my other sister said, yeah, I think that's a good idea. So anyway, it worked out well for us on that particular level. And I think this is the best place for my mom. So anyway, those are the kinds of things that, and it's not easy. It really is not easy. I had some tears over it too. I felt like I was doing something to my mother, whom I adore. And I felt like, it's hard to see them struggling with these decisions. And also, digging their heels in and saying, no, I don't want to do this. And then you have to step in and say, Mom, this is the best thing for you. And they don't necessarily agree with you. So then you feel like the bad person. But, in hindsight, it is tough, but it is necessary. And I'm totally with Amy on this. I totally get everything that she went through and how she felt, because I felt it myself, probably not as severely as Amy did, but everybody's different. I mean, my mom's different than her parents were, and so on and so forth. So, but there's a pattern here that, and when you have these decisions to make, you can't just, ignore them, like walk away from them and say, oh, I don't want to deal with it. They're hard things to deal with, and you need the support of your siblings to be able to get there.
Dave, any advice that you have to share from your experience?
Yeah, I think, we all want to make the best decision with the information that we have. But for a lot of us, these are uncharted waters for us personally. You don't know what you don't know. And so you draw upon the resources that are available to you. You work through with your family through your own dynamics and your own expectations and how this might all fit together best for you. And what kind of outcome are you looking for? And part of it might be, how much time do you think that we're going to be dealing with here? One experience with my father, he's got a friend from church who is 100 years old, and he's living with his daughter and her husband. And so Paige was talking to Dad, and turned out that they were all going to come over for Sunday lunch after church. And so it was so fun to see them together, and then hadn't seen each other in well over a year, and swap stories and hear experiences. And his son-in-law asked my dad, he said, what's your favorite part about living here? And without even taking a breath, he said, feeling loved. And for us, that was the most gratifying thing. And through it all, you do what you can, you make the best decisions that you can, and you trust the professionals, and you trust your instincts, and you commit to it, and then you run with it.
That's good advice too. Okay, so I'd like to open it up for questions. It's 1:50, so we've got a little bit more time. So if anybody does want to submit some questions to our Q&A, one of the questions we have in there right now is a question for everybody. If you were to do it all over again, would you choose the same path? So Sally, I think you said yes earlier, but anything to add to that?
No, I feel like the path we took was just the same path I would, advise. I feel very good about it. My mother is very happy. She still adores us and wants to see us, whenever she can, but she's at the same time very happy where she is. And, that independent part of her nature is important for her to have her own place and to have her own friends and to feel like she's living her life the way she wants to.
Dave, how about for you?
Yeah, I think we're pleased with the decision. I think we probably could have been a little bit more proactive in conversations within the family dynamics of who's going to do what and ways we support one another. Just kind of being on the same page. My sister's far more relational rather than proactive, so she's more concentrated on loving my dad. But how do you do that in a day-to-day way when you don't live together? And you work through it. So far so good. We're pleased with it.
Yeah. Do you think your dad agrees that he would have chosen the same path as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He calls it home.
Good. Amy, do you feel that your family, that you guys would have all chosen the same path?
Absolutely, absolutely. And now that both of my parents have passed, just seeing them move through the continuum at the community that they were at has really solidified my thinking in my mind, even for myself in the future, because I see the value that a continuing care retirement community offers, not just to the residents, but to the family also.
All right. Next question is a really good one. How did you initiate these conversations with your parents regarding a need for more care? Any suggestions on the best way to start that conversation? Anyone want to jump into that one? Go ahead, Sally.
Yeah, we took our mom out together to a restaurant and we started to talk to her about her memory, issues. And she listened and she said, well, I don't feel any different, but, we took it in baby steps, that was the first part. And then everything from there, then she began to recognize that she was having memory issues and she would tell all her friends, well, if I don't remember what I just said, understand that I have short-term memory loss and, that's just the way it is. So she was pragmatic about it. And I think that my mother's temperament, she's very independent. She can be stubborn. We kind of knew that it would be a bit difficult or very difficult to get her to change or to move, but we understood her and we just kept reinforcing the fact that we wanted to make sure she was safe and that she was cared for and that we weren't worried all the time about her. And her kids are her most favorite friends. I mean, we are the most important thing to her. So, what would she's like one of the gang. So it's like, okay, I guess I'm going to be taken care of by the gang. So this is what we're going to do. So at any rate, that's how it went. And I feel pretty good about it.
All right. So next up, any other suggestions or anything on how to start the conversation with your family? No? Okay. Next question up. Was there any specific professional input that was helpful when determining a need for more care, specifically from doctors, resources like books or movies or podcasts?
Yeah, I took my mom to a to a neurologist to have her tested. And she tested for early stages of Alzheimer's. And that was a big surprise to her. It was like, whoa, really? And once she got used to that, she didn't really get upset about it. She wasn't upset. She just, well, I know how I feel. I think I'm okay, but I know a lot of people that have memory issues. So she explained it away. She wasn't afraid of that diagnosis. And I would say so far with her, it's been a slow progression, and she's so intelligent that it's affected a part of her brain that's short term. But she can, like I said, she can play bridge. That's not an easy game to play, and do pretty well at it. And she also does crossword puzzles and all that. And if you were to meet her in the moment, you would go, oh, there's nothing wrong with this woman, unless she asked you the same question. Like you just answered a question for her, and then she would ask you the same question again. So anyway, that's kind of her developmental process right now and where she's at.
Was that neurologist appointment that you guys had, was that before the move to Porter Hills then?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was very short. I think within like 4 months or whatever.
Mhm.
But we knew that she needed something more.
For our family, I'll just say, we read a lot of books. Now, of course, this was at the point of time where we already knew that our mother had dementia, but she did not have the same personality type, Sally, as your mother. My mother was, she refused to go to the neurologist and said that we were the crazy ones. And so having any kind of conversation with her was a non-starter, and would usually end in her telling me to get out and go back to whatever state I lived in. She couldn't remember, but so I just, even though I work in the field, I read every book that I could get my hands on, to learn, but also to help me to realize that I wasn't alone, because that was really, there were very hard times when I thought nobody will understand what this is like. And so it was important for me to read stories from other families and how they dealt with things. But then also the staff in the community, I think, is a valuable resource in what's going on with a parent to help you make decisions about, next steps.
Okay, so this question is for Dave. With you working at Porter Hills, did you have much conversation with your father about moving to Porter Hills instead of moving in with you?
Yeah, we had a lot of them because that was his expectation. And, for me, I was fairly new here. And it was my own personal challenge to kind of work through that process of, do I believe in this community or not? I work here every day. Am I buying into this or not? So that was a challenge for me. Part of it was we were in the throes of COVID regulations and restrictions. And we didn't know how much longer Dad had to live. And I knew that if he moved into an area of care, that my sister might not ever see him again. And he would pass on under those circumstances. And so that was a pretty pivotal piece of that. And with my wife being a registered nurse, that brought a whole new gift set that made it far more possible than normal circumstances.
Well, and you and I talked a little bit, just like I talk with many clients about the pros and cons of the move too. So I don't even think it's you buying into Porter Hills in our community or not. I think it's you do what's right for your family, and that can be different for everybody.
Thank you.
So yeah. All right. So it is 2:00. So we've got one final question, which is just asking if visitors are welcome here at Porter Hills Village. So I can answer that one because I deal with it every day. We are open for tours, and families are able to come in and visit. Our rules for families are that they schedule their visits in advance. We have a website where they just sign up for that. but they're able to visit 2 people at a time and come in and see their loved ones. Sally, you said you were in yesterday and you're coming back in tomorrow, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah, so we're open for visitors. We're happy to have you guys come in and see us here. And that should continue as long as, you know, COVID kind of with the precautions and everything that we're at right now. So ending on that, if you do have any questions from here on out, I am the sales counselor here for the Village Center, which is where our higher levels of care. Dave and Amy obviously are part of the sales team with me. And so we're happy to answer any questions that you have. I will be following up with people after the presentation as well, just to check in and get any feedback or if there's any other questions. So thank you so much for joining us.